Today we have someone very special who started his professional journey by first tallying balance sheets, and just like that, today balances flavors in his unique dishes. He's an individual who has truly redefined what passion can do for one's profession at any age, and he's become one of the finalists on MasterChef UK in 2023. A former financial wizard, he is now a chef and a culinary consultant, a motivational speaker, and someone who redefines European cuisine with Indian expertise. Please join me in welcoming Chef Anurag Aggarwal. Thank you so much for joining us, Chef.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for such a flattering introduction. I really appreciate it.
So just to get started, of course, from the my first question right off the top is from the heavy breakfast of parathas and kulchas, that we have in Gurgaon, to a very delicate English breakfast. Your journey has been very unique and rather different. So what was your first introduction to cooking, and how did you adopt these two cultures that you work with?
I feel absolutely blessed to be exposed to different cultures, both from personal as well as professional perspective. After moving to UK, I have started looking at things, including our own Indian culture, from a very different point of view. And it is very liberating in a way when you start understanding about your own culture in such a positive manner. Back in India, if I talk about a little about my background, I was born and brought up in a city called Gurgaon, very near to Delhi. And food was like any other Indian family, always part of our lives. Being it any festival, celebration, or anything under the sun, food has to be there. So I think from there, the bug has started somewhere where I started experimenting with food, and I developed that kind of passion for food. On social media, I call myself Anurag Food Story, and there's a little reason behind it. I feel food is not about cuisines, whether it's Indian or English cuisine. It's not about recipes or ingredient. It's more about the nostalgia and stories it carries with it.
True.
So you talk about the differences, what I might have felt after moving to UK. So it was never about, never a question me to adapt to a different food style. It was always about just finding and tapping that love, what food carries, whether you talk about fancy English breakfast or butter coated, butter dripped aloo paratha. So I found the same even in English breakfast.
So lovely. But circling back, so what are one of your earliest memories in the kitchen? Like when you say this passion was ignited, was it when you were really young or along the journey? Where did you fall in love with the kitchen?
It's hard to pinpoint one point, but again, as I mentioned, food was always a integral part of our lifestyle, and I was very close to my late mother also, and she was always very busy in cooking, and food was a medium for her to express her unconditional love to the family. I think that's where it
I see.
started. And I remember, I think I might be at the age of 10 or something, that was the first my food memory where I attempted to make a hot chai on a gas stove. So that's my very first food memory.
That is so wonderful. And I think a lot of us share that memory of cooking with our mothers and sort of starting there and trying to learn. For you, it was chai. With a lot of us, I think it's Maggie. I think that's the first thing. Noodles is what
Absolutely,
we start
absolutely.
with, a midnight snack in the exam season.
Yeah,
But along that journey, of course, you switched careers from finance and everything to cooking. You went from profession and then you made your
yeah.
passion your profession at a later age. And how difficult was that for you? And of course, we live in a day and age when shifting to non-conventional professions is, of course, seen with a lot of skepticism. So, how was that journey for you?
Yeah, I think to be honest, like it was an exciting journey. It was an exciting transition. But if I talk about, is there any specific formula to that in my literally financial language? Is there any equation you have to follow to make such a transition? And sometimes people feel it's about, you can't pursue your passion if you reach beyond a particular age. You can do that while you are young, or you can explore your passion once you are retired. More or less, it is a kind of mixed feeling. You have to go with your heart and mind both. It's a balanced approach. And when people talk about, is there any age specific for to make such change, I think they are not absolutely wrong. Also, there is a bit logic behind it. I don't know whether you are aware of, there's a very famous management theory, hierarchy of needs, by Maslow. So
Yes,
he talks about these, 5 stages in human
correct.
life, which starts from very fundamental physiological needs like food and shelter, and it goes till very higher end self-actualization.
Self-actualization.
So I believe like if somebody are really passionate about career change, or they have a passion, it depends where they are on that ladder. So their position will facilitate them to be able to take that diversion toward their passion from their so-called very safe and regular profession. So I would that's what we need to follow. And personally, for me, it wasn't an easy journey at all. As I say, like it was a mix of my heart was in some other direction, my mind was saying I need to stay in a secure, so-called well-paid financial career. So it's kind of, but one thing I would say, that when the calling comes, when that real calling comes from your heart, you have to start giving importance to non-measurables. Generally in life, we just are focused about what we can quantify, what we can measure. So sometimes you have to listen to your heart, and there's much more than just measuring or assessing things.
That was so beautifully said. I think, like somebody put in the chat, absolutely getting goosebumps. I think I got goosebumps right now as well. I think you put that so beautifully that, like, I like, especially even if you compare that to a kitchen, sometimes you need to put the teaspoons away and, like our mothers say, just
Yeah.
like, just measure it with how much you feel like putting and then just make it. Right? But I think that was absolutely beautiful. But for possibly some, let's say, culinary aspirants in the chat, if there was a checklist you'd want to put together on trying to get into the culinary field, what would that be? What would you want someone to know before they get into the field?
I think culinary world overall is kind of an art. There obviously there's a checklist. You know always in your heart, are you passionate enough? Like, is your cooking is good, and you can really make a profession out of it. But I think like whoever is listening today, my message would be, whether it's you want to pursue your career as a culinary professional or any passion whatsoever, you need to answer two questions. First, just with an honest heart, hand on your heart, ask yourself, are you truly passionate about something? Do you something Are you truly love something, love some profession? It's not a fluke. It's not a just new year resolution where what you want to do for 15 days and then give up. So if the answer to that comes as yes, and we all have that sixth sense, we know honestly what's going inside. If the answer is yes, then I would say the second step, second formula is gather little bit of courage to take the first step. And you will be, I can assure you from my own experience, then the magic start happening around you. The whole universe conspires towards supporting you to proceed further on that passion. There's a that reminds me of a Shah Rukh Khan movie where he says the whole kainat will,
Correct.
what, I forget that specific dialogue, but that's true. That's true. So just these two things: be honest with your passion and gather that courage to take the very first step. It will all happen. I promise you.
Again, just so beautifully put. And I hope you're just seeing the chats that are pouring and everyone's just absolutely in love with what you're saying. And I think it just makes so much sense to just, like you said, find where you are on that pyramid of, like, getting what you need,
Yeah.
and then to going to what you want, and then just checking if, if you tick those right boxes in your heart. And speaking of that, what, like you said off the top as well, one of the biggest exports India has in the world is food. Whether it's at home, there are so many diverse cuisines, and then abroad, of course, food has become one of our greatest soft powers. And like you said, in the UK as well, you've seen how that's changed over the past couple of decades. So, if you were to conceptualize India on a menu card, what would you describe as its unique offerings and flavors to represent this essence to the world?
It's I think you just touched upon a topic which is very close to my heart. And in fact, I'm working on the similar concept. What is Indian cuisine? And I'm trying to write a book around it, you know, and hopefully one day somebody would produce a TV series as well. Because, being an Indian, if somebody asked me, and this question really bothered me when I was going through MasterChef journey.
Mm-hmm.
So we all know, okay, like I am Indian by birth and by heart and from every perspective. I live in UK, right? But if somebody asks me, okay, Anurag, define me what is Indian cuisine, I'll be speechless, right? Where do you start from? So I was just
Correct.
thinking about it, how, as an Indian, I can explain, conceptualize either on a menu card or just as a theory, what is Indian cuisine? So the best answer I got come up with is, I think Indian cuisine is like a colorful tapestry, where each thread represent different aspect, being it culture, region, religion, or lifestyle, all the colors of different spices, foreign influences, whatnot, list is endless. So that's how I like to portray Indian cuisine, and more in the philosophical sense. I think Indian cuisine for India is much more than food, you know, and
Correct.
and that is kind of spilling over even in our global persona as well. So I would see food, when we call it as Indian cuisine, is like an invisible thread which hold all the beads of our life.
That is
So
so true.
that's how I like to conceptualize Indian menu, because it's it's not about just spices or not about just curries. It is much more than that.
True, and like you very rightly said, I think for us, food goes so much more into every aspect of our identity. Like you said, we have food for festivals, we have food for sad occasions, we have food for everything, and there's a
Absolutely.
special dish. It's a meaning. There's so much. There's just so much to it that you said. But how do you think this whole idea of Indian food has been um, inculcated across the world? Like when you say in the UK, you were also part of MasterChef and a lot of other places. Do you think that narrative of Indian food being much more than just oily, spicy food, do you think it's changing? And what can young India, all the people watching this, do to change that narrative?
Definitely, this is changing. Generally, Indian food is perceived in a very narrow sense, especially in the
Correct.
European world. And I don't see it's wrong or right. It is like this only. If we talk about India, for that matter,
Hmm.
I was growing up, so all we know that pizza and pasta is Italian, and that's all Italian food is. Chow Mein is Chinese, and that's I all know about Chinese food. America is all about burgers, right? But we know that's not true. There's much more than these particular dishes. So yeah, for India, curries, naan are very famous. But I would put it, let's say, it's a book cover. It's a book cover for a very thick book called Indian Cuisine. And once you get through the cover, then you start reading. As an Indian, especially young generation now with social media, you'll be surprised. The perception and the knowledge, awareness about Indian cuisine is changing very fast than what we expect. And it's, of course, our responsibility to spread that awareness. But remember one thing, never feel offended. Never feel offended if somebody says Indian food is all about curry. So that's what they know. It's not their mistake, right? That's how they have seen the book called Indian Cuisine,
True.
with a cover page with very spicy curries and naan.
Correct. And I completely get that. And I think you so beautifully put that the responsibility of teaching people about this, letting people know is ours. Like,
Yeah,
if we have given them an image, like you said, if we've only shown them the cover and expected them to understand the book, then that's a little unfair on all of our part. But
absolutely.
I think credit has to be given to the likes of you who are a part of this global community of Indian chefs that are trying to change this narrative every day. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you do and sort of changing this narrative globally. And like you said previously, if that book does ever come out, I'm sure everybody on this chat will be the first ones rushing to buy it. And I hope all of us get signed copies. So we're
Thank you
very
so much.
excited.
Definitely, definitely.
But in this idea of now, like you said, I think now with the whole idea of social media, what you said has become so much easier. Telling people about cuisines and telling people about what the nit and grit of things are, because everybody's kitchen has now become, like you said, a production house.
Yeah,
Right? We have so much exchange of culture that happens, so much of talking that happens as well. I've learned so much about other Indian cuisines just sitting at home on Instagram, let alone global
exactly.
cuisine.
Yeah,
But I also have a few friends who are aspiring chefs, and that's what they say. where they say that now the whole idea of food is also starting to get governed by likes and comments. And as someone who's, of course, on social media putting out your food stories, like you said, how do you balance that sort of thing in the head that says it is about likes and comments? Is how do you go about that?
Yeah, I honestly speaking, yeah, it does impact you. You know, when I just made my Instagram account just last year in February, it's going to be 1 year. Yeah, initially you get bothered about it, like, how many views are you going to get, comments, likes. So you have to take that into consideration. It's a necessary evil. You have to live with that. But talking about food, again, we have to keep going back to the fundamentals. What food is. Instagram or any other social media is just a tool to showcase that, to spread the knowledge, to do whatever you want to do with that. So, talking about social media, when we think about consuming food, going into the fundamentals, it's one of the experience. Consuming food is one of the experience where essentially you use all your five perceptual senses, right? So we say, okay, you eat with your eyes. Of course, you get captivating by colors when you see food. You smell food, you touch food, and you hear the crunch, right? So that is the hearing thing. And lastly, you smell food, aroma and all that. So all five senses are engaged if you really want to enjoy food or consume food. Yeah, but we have to agree when it comes to social media, it's all about just using one sense, which is pretty much just seeing the food. Other fives are unfortunately missing. Probably technology might be so advanced in few years where you will be able to smell or probably eat food through screen. You never know.
That would make it absolutely lovely. But you were
Absolutely.
saying.
Yeah. So, my advice, like based on my own journey, day one, yeah, you will be dragged with the, current trends and that hunger for attention, likes, all the comments, views. But I would always say two things to any chef, and now I try to follow that. Always cook what you like to eat. You can always take inspiration, learn new things. There's nothing wrong about it. But always cook with your heart what you would personally like to eat. It will be very tasty. And and about how you want to plate or present food, do it what comes naturally to you. If you try to copy, especially the art, I can assure you, most of the cases, it will be a disaster. It won't look beautiful. So just follow your heart, cook what you like to eat, and present it the way you like to present it. It will be beautiful. You will find your niche sooner or later. The trends are very, I don't like them personally. People do all sorts of things. It works for them. That's fine. But if you force yourself to do something which is trendy, it won't be long term.
True. Again, like I said earlier, I think you have such a beautiful way of putting things. And just going one step further from this, one thing that I think is very unique to India is also its idea and meaning of vegetarianism. The whole dairy, non-dairy. I think in that sense, we've been ahead of the curve. But in a lot of ways, we haven't either. One thing that we do at IIMUN is when we do any of our conferences, which is about
Yeah.
220 in India and 35 countries across, we make it a point to serve only vegetarian food to our delegates. Whether it's in Japan or Uruguay or in London, where we were just a week ago, we celebrated Republic Day in the British Parliament. So we did that just a week ago. So we make it a point to serve vegetarian food to our delegates. So, but in this whole curve of veganism, Indian food is still yet to take sort of its rightful place, if one might say. So, what do you think are the factors causing that, and what can we change in that curve?
So, what's your question? Like, how to bring Indian cuisine or Indian food on this so-called fancy vegan trend?
No, that's the thing, right? So, in most of Indian food has been vegan
Yeah,
and meet a lot of people's definitions, and these have been recipes that have been passed down for generations and generations. But in a lot of ways, if we look at what vegan food means on the internet or anywhere now, it's mostly Mediterranean or Western European in that
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So where, so what can we, as all of us, do to sort of bring awareness to the fact that these yummy, brilliant dishes do exist that completely meet everyone's requirements, and they've been existing here for so long, and people don't need to just eat salads and like very bland things, but can also come back here. So that, in an essence, that is the question.
Yeah, so again, like as I previously said, social media is a big player in that. Even I post, by culture, by religion, I am vegetarian, though I eat all kind of non-vegetarian food as well. So it's about just spreading that awareness, putting those dishes out, and now a lot of books are coming out, which is kind of exploring and giving that new exposure to non-Indian population to get accustomed to that vegetarian food is not a alternative. It can be a lifestyle, and that's what I think most of the Indians, we know
True.
that, because it was never about, okay, you can't have meat, and there was not any option. That was the lifestyle, and we never
Correct.
felt that you are missing out on anything if you're not eating any kind of meat. So it's more about awareness. But one more thing I like to talk about, when we talk about vegan food, vegetarian food, if you go back to our history, and especially how food evolved in
Correct.
within India, it was always very regional.
Correct.
Even in India, if you go to more like states like Haryana, in Madhya Pradesh, and but if you go to coastal region or upper north, so you find a lot of consumption of meat-based product or fish.
Correct.
So it was always, the food preferences were always driven by whatever is produced locally, right? So vegetarian food was part of the supply chain, which promote sustainability, less carbon footprint, and all the fancy things which are coming now in the globe. So I would say all food are good. Consume whatever is naturally produced in your region. If it is vegetarian diet, go with that. If you're getting a lot of seafood, eat that. There's not, because that's how the nature has even made us
Correct.
to consume certain food in different regions, different time of the year. So it kind of just go with the nature. And yeah, spread awareness, eat all kind of food, I would say.
I think that's lovely because, like you said, I think the whole idea of food and seasons and food and regions has always been so intrinsic. And like, there are certain fruits that are produced in the winter that you're supposed to eat because
Absolutely.
they keep you warm. And
Yeah,
there's a science and a method behind it.
yeah,
And I think for all of us to take a step back and understand why is very important, which is something that you always do. I think one thing that I noticed while I was, of course, preparing for this is your storyteller nature,
yeah,
which we're also seeing very much in the way you're conversing and like, how everything just comes with so much meaning. And a constant effort that I've seen you put is always talk about where your dishes come from and where they can go and what. I think you go into a little more essence of them. You bring out that essence internally as well, not just, like you said, in terms of taste and sight and hearing them, but also an emotional sense to them. Why did you want to adopt this process in your food? And why is storytelling such an intrinsic part of your food process?
yeah. So here I'm going to say very something very controversial or drastic. I think your point about this storytelling and history clubbed with the food, I see it actually other way around. I think the fundamental things for our existence as human civilization is all about stories and history. And food plays a role of a medium through which you pass on those stories from one generation to another. So food is just a medium. So, but then what is the relationship between these two? What is stories, histories, and what is food? I think there is a very beautiful and very precious relationship where you can say food is meaningless without stories and history, and without food, history and stories would be lost forever.
Wow.
So I can't take out either one from each other. They have to live together, and then that's where like the food is. That's why it is so integral part of our existence, our culture, society, being it any society whatsoever. It just always uses that medium to carry something what you can't document, those emotions. And of course that goes to a lot of stories, histories, values. So that's how I see
True.
that, and I couldn't have it any other way.
Lovely. And could you share one of these stories with us? Just one for everyone watching. Is there one that has stood out to you over your journey?
About food,
Yeah.
yeah. So I always, I host these special guest chef nights where I collaborate with the restaurants, etc. And I try to come up with a menu and always give some kind of backstory. What is the dish? Why it is came from? So one of my signature dish is slow cooked leg of lamb, and the inspiration of that dish comes from Mughal Raj back in India, almost hundreds of years ago. So what is the story? In those days, lamb as a meat was considered very inferior meat
Okay.
for the poor people because it was a wild animal, this and that. So all those, very nosy Nawabs used to dislike that, used to feel that that is not our class to eat that. So all those armies of royal chefs, they took that challenge on that, yeah, we have to do something about it. It's not fair on part of Nawab to treat any meat inferior or superior. Ultimately, it's a living being what you are, trying to eat. So they invented a dish which was full of aromatic spices, which kind of subsides that aroma, earthy nature of lamb. And they cooked in a particular way so it almost melts in your mouth.
Okay.
So I would say what I learned from that story, yeah, of course, they satisfied Nawab from culinary perspective, but it was more about invention. When in life we stuck up with different challenges, we say, okay, this is not working, that is not working. But when you take that challenge on, when you try to think out of the box, so you tend to invent things, and the fundamentals are same, ingredients are same, but you come up with such amazing creations. And food, like I always say, we don't really create anything in food. Everything is given by nature. We just assemble things, we just do
True.
bit of mix and match here and there. So this is one of the thing, like I think this inspires me to always look for invention whatever you do. And that's one of my story which I always tell to my audience or any different groups.
I think that's absolutely lovely. And personally, I could just keep listening to more and more of these stories because, as somebody who enjoys history and also enjoys, I'm not as skilled as in cooking food, but I love eating it. So just knowing where that dish came from and what it's doing is just so important. And I think we were recently also talking about how so many ingredients that we consider to be ours actually came from a completely different part of the world no later than 200 or 300 years ago, like potatoes, chilies. All of these came from, like, the new world, as it
Yeah,
was called, and were introduced to us, and we've adopted them so beautifully into our cuisine. So is
absolutely.
there any such Indian ingredient that you see being inculcated across the world? Like, is that what has been one of India's largest exports in terms of an ingredient that has now become this global phenomenon?
Yeah, I am sure you must be aware about that. Black pepper was one. Black pepper was kind of, I think, cause of lot of bad thing which happened in the globe, hundreds of years ago, a lot of wars, etc. So that at one point of time it was considered as black gold because it was so expensive, and the whole, especially the Western world, gone mad about that. How can such basic spice can be, absolutely life changing? So that is something. And now we think black pepper, I think not many Indians use black pepper, but it's being used globally as the basic seasoning, salt and pepper, what they call. So yeah, black pepper, I would say, is one of the Indian ingredient which is very famous. And all, I would say, it's hard to pick any specific spice. For example, chilies are essentially not Indian; they came from Mexico or
Correct.
other Mediterranean countries. But I think it's just the ability to blend a lot of ingredients, a lot of spices, and create that symphony kind of thing. So that skill itself, which is beyond ingredient, is, I would say, Indian stamp on the culinary world.
I think that's beautiful. Our Indian stamp on the culinary world being black pepper. And just before I move to our fun last segment, I had one last question for you, which is you've created so many dishes, you've put together so many
Yeah.
authentic menu cards of your own. But for all of our aspiring chefs and for anybody else watching and those who will watch going ahead, what is your recipe for success and what are the ingredients that have been your sure shots in this process?
It's yeah, recipe for success. It's such a hard question. There's none, to be honest. There is none. And if you talk about cooking as such, it's all about, as I mentioned before, in the context of social media. So always cook what you love to eat. And when you are able to trigger that more qualitative aspect of that, being it story, love, nostalgia, it will reflect through your food. And then again, success means, I think the question here is more about what success really means. What success really means, and it is different from person to person. So first, you need to use your intellect to come up with what success really means to you. Is it a destination? If it is, find a path to reach that if you really insist. But for me, like, it was never a destination. It is more about gathering that courage and having that very genuine intention to give your 100%. And that's success to me, where you never have any regret. So when I gone to MasterChef, of course, there was a lot of pressure, like my own imposed pressure, how I would perform, whether judges would like my dishes or not. So then I just took some time to myself to think about it. What should be my strategy? What is again my recipe of success? What should be my success formula in this one of the top most culinary competitions? And then I said, I can only do what I can control. And all I could do is just to produce a good plate of food. How judges are going to like, what other contestants are going to cook, that is not under my control. I don't even know that. So I take that out of my recipe of success. I'll just focus on what I can do best.
Lovely. I think that was so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I'm sure your recipe for success and the ingredients in it, I think, are the most unique, which is just passion, self reflection, and like you said, just identifying where you are on your journey and where it is you want to be next. And
Yes.
on that note, I'd just like to take us to our last segment, which is our rapid fire.
Oh,
I'll just
brilliant.
I'll just put forth a set of words to you and words of phrases, and you can just tell us the first thing that comes to your mind. So we can just do that before we end. The
Sure.
first one is your comfort food.
Uh, Tur dal and chawal with bhindi.
Beautiful. I think that's a common one for all of us.
Yeah.
The next one is Europe.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. MasterChef.
A dream.
Chai.
Winter mornings.
Winter mornings. Street food.
Golgappa.
Making us all hungry. Youth.
Fresh blood.
India.
Encyclopedia for human existence.
Wow. And the last one, which is our organization, which is I.I.M.U.N.
Oh, I would say a brilliant and beautiful book cover for the book called India.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think in the context of this live, you ending saying that makes it so much more beautiful for us. So thank you so much. Um, and I think in on that cover to have somebody like you representing India and India's food, which is like we said, food is everything. Food is we have food for everything. We wake up with food, we go to bed with food, we celebrate with food, we mourn with food, we do everything with food in India. And for you to be taking that essence and not just the dish, but the essence and making that a global thing means so much to all of us. So thank you for what you do. And it's been absolutely lovely speaking to you. I think everybody in the chat is emulating what I'm saying. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us on this live today. It's been absolutely lovely. Thank you so much, Chef. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Namaste.
Cheers.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.